Hey there, folks. Welcome back to another episode of Full Spectrum Frontiers, where we dive into the complex web of conflict, national security, and how it all ties back to you. Yes, you, the average Joe or Jane, sipping coffee, stuck in traffic, or doing whatever it is you do while you listen to podcasts. I'm your host, Bennett Tanton, and today we're going to tackle a topic that's as old as time, or at least as old as the United States itself. I'm talking about, drumroll please, U.S. border and national security. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh boy, Bennett, are we really going to talk about walls and border patrol agents for the next hour? Well, yeah, but no. Stick with me here, because there's a lot more to this story than just walls and fences. We're talking about a multi-layered issue that intertwines immigration control, drug interdiction, and the prevention of potential terrorist entry. Basically, it's a full-blown spaghetti mess of national security challenges. And just like any good bowl of spaghetti, it's got some meatballs, a few spicy peppers, and maybe even a mystery ingredient or two that'll keep you guessing. But why should you care about border security? Well, for starters, it impacts everything from the economy to the social fabric of our communities. It's about more than just keeping bad guys out. It's about how we define our nation, our values, and how we interact with our neighbors. And let's be honest, we all want to be good neighbors, right? Like Mr. Rogers in a Kevlar vest. Except instead of singing songs, we're singing about strategy, policy, and yes, sometimes even surveillance drones. So, buckle up, folks, because today we're going on a journey through the ins and outs of U.S. border security. We're going to explore the past, dissect the present, and peer into the crystal ball to see what the future might hold. And of course, we'll do it all with a touch of humor and a whole lot of optimism. After all, if we can't laugh at the absurdity of the world, we might just end up crying, and nobody wants that. All right, let's get this show on the road. Let's roll up our sleeves and dive headfirst into our first segment, the historical context and evolution of U.S. border security. I know history isn't everyone's favorite subject, but stick with me here. This isn't your high school history class with a teacher and a dusty textbook. This is full spectrum frontiers, where history comes alive. Kind of like one of those reenactment folks, but without the funny hats and muskets. Now, when we think about the U.S.-Mexico border today, it's easy to imagine it's always been this militarized, this controversial, and this, well, important. But in reality, the border wasn't always such a hot topic. In fact, for a good chunk of American history, it was more like a blurry line on a map somewhere in the desert that not many folks paid much attention to. But all that started to change in the early 20th century. And guess what? The U.S. Border Patrol, our modern-day gatekeepers, wasn't even established until 1924. That's right, less than 100 years ago. So what prompted Uncle Sam to suddenly start caring about who was crossing the Rio Grande or the arid sands of Arizona? Well, like most things in America, it all comes down to politics, economics, and a little bit of fear-mongering, because what would America be without a little bit of that? Let's start at the beginning. Back in the early 1900s, the U.S. was a growing nation with a booming economy. The roaring 20s were about to kick off, and people were migrating all over the place. But the first big push for border security came during Prohibition. That's right. The U.S. was more worried about bootleggers and their smuggled booze than they were about people. It turns out that back then, the border was as much about stopping Canadian whiskey from coming in as it was about keeping people out. So, if you think about it, our first border security measures were all about party control. Funny, right? Then came the Great Depression. Now, during tough economic times, people tend to look for someone to blame, and often, that blame gets pointed at the newcomers. So, with jobs scarce and tempers high, there was a push to curb immigration, especially from Mexico. The border was tightened, and we started seeing more enforcement, but it was still nothing like today. Fast forward to the Cold War era, and things start to get a bit more interesting. With all the espionage, cloak and dagger stuff going on, border security took on a new dimension. It wasn't just about keeping out illegal immigrants anymore. It was also about preventing spies, communists, and anyone deemed undesirable from entering the country. If it sounds like a spy novel, that's because it sort of was. But the big shift, the moment things really started to heat up, came in the 1980s and 1990s. The war on drugs, folks. This was when border security went from being a part-time gig to a full-on operation. Suddenly, the U.S. wasn't just dealing with people looking for work. We were dealing with massive drug cartels smuggling tons of narcotics across the border. This led to increased funding, more agents, and a significant rise in infrastructure. The border began to look more like the militarized zone we know today. And then, of course, we have 9/11, a day that changed everything. Overnight, the border wasn't just about stopping drugs or illegal immigration anymore. It was about national security, plain and simple. The creation of the Department of Homeland Security in 2003 and the ramping up of border enforcement were direct responses to the newfound fear of terrorist infiltration. Suddenly, our southern border wasn't just a political talking point. It was a potential weak spot in the armor of the homeland. From the Great Wall of Trump to drones, thermal imaging, and high-tech surveillance, border security has evolved dramatically in a relatively short amount of time. We've gone from a few guys on horseback trying to stop booze runners to an intricate web of fences, checkpoints, and tech straight out of a sci-fi movie. And it's all happened in less than a century. But here's the kicker. Despite all the advancements, the border is still a topic of fierce debate. Are we doing enough? Are we doing too much? How do we balance security with freedom, safety with compassion? These are the questions we'll be tackling today. But before we move on, let's take a moment to reflect on how far we've come and just how much more complex the road ahead might be. So, that's a little history lesson for you. And remember, those who don't learn from history are doomed to, well, keep listening to more podcasts about history, I guess. But seriously, folks, understanding where we've been is crucial to figuring out where we're going. We've talked about the history, the evolution, and now it's time to get into something a bit more human. Because, let's be honest, behind every policy, behind every law and regulation, there are real people. And this is where things get a bit messy, a bit emotional, and yes, a bit controversial. Today we're talking about immigration control and human rights. Now, if you've been following the news, or if you have a social media account, or heck, if you've even just been alive for the past decade, you've probably seen the debates, the protests, the fiery speeches, and the heartbreaking stories about immigration in America. It's a hot-button issue, and for good reason. Immigration is about more than just border security. It's about identity, opportunity, and the very soul of a nation. But let's start with a quick reality check. The U.S. is a nation of immigrants. I mean, unless you're Native American, somewhere in your family history, somebody packed up their bags, said goodbye to the old country, and sailed across an ocean to start a new life here. That's the American story. And yet, here we are in 2024, grappling with some very tough questions. How do we control our borders while remaining a land of opportunity? How do we enforce our laws without losing our humanity? And most importantly, how do we balance security with compassion? These are not easy questions, folks. And let's be clear, there are no easy answers. But that's exactly why we're here, to peel back the layers and see what's really going on. First up, let's talk about asylum seekers and refugees. Now, these are people who are often fleeing violence, persecution, and even death in their home countries. They come to the U.S. not because they want to, but because they have to. For them, the journey to the border is a matter of life and death. And yet, when they get here, they often face an entirely new set of challenges. Long wait times, overcrowded detention centers, legal hurdles, and sometimes even separation from their families. And this is where the debate really heats up. On one side, you've got people saying, hey, we need to protect our borders, enforce our laws, and keep our country safe. And they're not wrong. But on the other side, you've got people saying, wait a minute, these are human beings we're talking about. They deserve compassion, dignity, and a fair shot. And guess what? They're not wrong either. So, what do we do? How do we strike that balance? Well, that's the million-dollar question. And it's a question that has split Congress, divided communities, and frankly, kept a lot of policymakers up at night. But one thing is clear. We need a solution that both respects our laws and honors our values. Now let's pivot a bit and talk about another group that often gets caught in the crossfire, the dreamers. These are young people who were brought to the U.S. as children, often without any say in the matter. They've grown up here, gone to school here, some have even served in the military, and yet they live with the constant fear of deportation. They are, in every sense but one, Americans. And yet they find themselves in a kind of legal limbo, not knowing what the future holds. And this brings us to another layer of complexity, the role of the courts. Over the past few years, we've seen a series of court battles over immigration policy, from the fate of the dreamers, to the legality of travel bans, to the conditions in detention centers. And let's not forget the big one, the Supreme Court's ruling on family separations. These cases have not only shaped immigration policy, but have also sparked national debates about who we are as a country. But here's the thing. Regardless of where you stand on these issues, it's important to remember that behind every court case, every policy, and every protest sign, there are real people, mothers, fathers, children, families who are just trying to survive, just trying to find a better life. And that's something we can all relate to, isn't it? So, what's the solution? How do we navigate this complex web of immigration control and human rights? Well, there are a few ideas on the table. Some advocate for comprehensive immigration reform, a kind of all-encompassing approach that would address everything from border security to pathways to citizenship. Others call for more targeted measures, such as increasing funding for immigration courts to reduce backlogs or expanding programs that allow immigrants to work legally in the U.S. while their cases are being processed. And then there are the more, shall we say, extreme proposals. You've got folks calling for everything from abolishing ICE to building a wall so big it could be seen from space. Now, I'm not here to tell you which side is right or wrong. My job is to lay out the facts, give you the full spectrum, and let you decide for yourself. But here's the kicker, folks. At the end of the day, this isn't just about laws or policies or politics. It's about people. And as we continue to debate, discuss, and deliberate on this issue, let's not lose sight of that simple yet profound truth. All right, let's take a deep breath. Maybe grab a sip of water, because things are about to get even more intense. When we come back, we're going to dive into the murky waters of drug trafficking and contraband. Welcome back, folks. If you're still with me, then kudos to you. You're officially invested in this roller coaster ride through the wild world of U.S. border and national security. So far, we've covered the history, we've explored the human element, and now it's time to dive into something that's both gritty and a little bit like an action movie, minus the Hollywood glamour and more of the grim reality: drug trafficking and contraband. Now, I know what you're thinking. Bennett, this is going to be a dark turn. Aren't we supposed to be optimistic and inspirational here? And yes, you're right. But remember, folks, we're all about the full spectrum here. And that means confronting the darker sides of these issues too. And let's be real. Drug trafficking is one of the most persistent and complex challenges when it comes to border security. It's like a game of whack-a-mole, but instead of plastic moles, you've got drug cartels popping up left and right. And these moles don't just take a hit and go down, they adapt, evolve, and come back stronger. It's a never-ending battle. So, where do we start? How about with the basics? The U.S.-Mexico border is one of the most active drug trafficking corridors in the world. We're talking about thousands of miles of border spanning deserts, rivers, mountains, terrain that would make even the most seasoned adventurer think twice. But for drug traffickers, it's the highway to the American market. And folks, business is booming. We're talking about billions of dollars worth of drugs flowing into the U.S. every year. Cocaine, heroin, methamphetamines, fentanyl, the list goes on. And these drugs aren't just being smuggled in through the traditional routes like hidden compartments in cars or mules crossing on foot. No, no, no. We're talking about submarines, drones, and even tunnels that would make Bugs Bunny jealous. Now, you might be wondering, why is this such a big deal? Can't we just stop them at the border? Well, yes and no. The U.S. has invested billions. Yes, billions with a B in securing the border against drug trafficking. We've got high-tech surveillance, K-9 units, border patrol agents, National Guard troops, and even drones patrolling the skies. But here's the thing. For every tunnel we find, there's another one being dug. For every mule we catch, there are a dozen more waiting to take their place. And for every cartel we dismantle, there's another ready to move in and take over the business. And this brings us to the heart of the issue. Drug trafficking isn't just a border problem, it's a systemic issue that's deeply intertwined with economic conditions, political corruption, and social instability, not just in the U.S., but in the countries of origin as well. Mexico, for instance, has been in a constant battle with powerful drug cartels for decades. These cartels aren't just criminal organizations. They're like mini governments with their own armies, economies, and a terrifying amount of influence. And when there's that much money on the line, there's no shortage of people willing to risk it all to get a piece of the pie. So, what's being done to combat this? Well, a lot, actually. The US and Mexico have been working together through various initiatives like the Merida Initiative, a security cooperation agreement aimed at combating drug trafficking and organized crime. We're talking about joint operations, intelligence sharing, and billions of dollars in aid to help Mexico fight these cartels on their own turf. But again, this isn't a problem that can be solved overnight. It's like trying to put out a forest fire with a garden hose. You're making progress, sure, but the fire's still raging. But let's not get too downbeat here. There have been successes, significant ones. High-profile arrests, massive drug seizures, tunnels being discovered and shut down. And let's not forget the innovations in technology that are making it harder and harder for traffickers to operate. From X-ray scanners at border checkpoints to surveillance drones and even artificial intelligence that can predict smuggling patterns based on data. That's right, folks. We've got AI in the game now, and it's proving to be a pretty good teammate. But here's where things get tricky. Every time we come up with a new tactic or technology, the traffickers adapt. It's a constant game of cat and mouse, and right now, we're just trying to stay one step ahead. And that, my friends, is the challenge. How do we keep fighting this battle without burning out? How do we stay one step ahead of an enemy that's constantly evolving? And let's not forget the human cost here. The war on drugs has claimed countless lives, not just on the US side, but in Mexico as well. Police officers, soldiers, journalists, civilians, all caught in the crossfire. And then there's the social impact, the communities torn apart by addiction, the families broken by loss, and the ever-present fear of violence spilling over the border. It's a grim picture, no doubt about it. But, and this is important, it's not hopeless. Far from it. There's a growing realization that maybe, just maybe, it's time to rethink our approach. Instead of just trying to shut down supply routes and arrest traffickers, what if we looked at reducing demand? What if we invested more in treatment and rehabilitation programs? What if we addressed the root causes that make drug trafficking such a lucrative business in the first place? Economic instability, lack of opportunity, social inequality. These are the issues that need to be tackled if we ever want to see a real change. And here's where we get to the inspirational part, folks. Despite all the challenges, despite all the setbacks, there are people out there, dedicated, brave, and sometimes downright stubborn folks who are working day in and day out to make a difference. Border Patrol agents, law enforcement officers, social workers, community leaders, they're on the front lines, fighting the good fight. And they need our support, not just in words, but in action. We need to advocate for better policies, smarter strategies, and yes, more compassion. So, where does this leave us? Well, we're not going to solve the drug trafficking problem overnight, but we can start by shifting our perspective. We can start by recognizing that this is a multifaceted issue that requires a multifaceted approach. It's not just about building walls or beefing up security. It's about building bridges and creating opportunities. It's about understanding that every action has a reaction and that sometimes the best way to fight is to offer a helping hand, not just a clenched fist. All right, folks. I hope I didn't bum you out too much with this segment. It's a heavy topic, I know, but it's one we've got to face head on if we want to make real progress. Stick around, because when we come back, we're going to tackle another big one: the terrorism threat. Is it a real concern, or are we just letting fear get the best of us? Find out after this break. Now we're shifting gears to discuss something that sits at the intersection of fear and reality: the terrorism threat at our borders. Is it a legitimate concern, or are we just letting fear drive our policies? Buckle up, because this one's going to be a wild ride. All right, let's start by acknowledging the elephant in the room: 9/11. It's impossible to talk about terrorism and border security without referencing the events of that day. It was a defining moment in American history that reshaped our national security landscape, and frankly, it scared the living daylights out of all of us. Understandably so. But here's the thing. While the 9/11 hijackers did enter the U.S. legally, it wasn't through the Mexican or Canadian borders. They came in on visas, which is a whole different ballgame. Yet, post 9/11, we saw a massive shift in how we viewed our borders. Suddenly, every inch of that borderline was seen as a potential entry point for terrorists. Fast forward to today, and you'll find that fear still lingers. You've got people arguing that our borders are a sieve, letting in not just undocumented immigrants, but potential terrorists. On the flip side, others say, hey, wait a minute, let's look at the facts. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Strip away the rhetoric and see what's really going on. First, let's talk numbers. Since 9/11, there have been several high-profile arrests of individuals on the U.S. terror watch list attempting to cross the border. But before we start sounding the alarm bells, let's put that in perspective. The number of these cases is relatively small compared to the overall volume of border crossings. And in many instances, these individuals were caught, not because they were trying to sneak in, but because they were flagged through intelligence sharing and alert systems. That's right. Good old-fashioned detective work. Now, this isn't to say there aren't legitimate threats. The world is a dangerous place, and there are certainly bad actors out there who would love nothing more than to exploit any vulnerability they can find. But here's the kicker: those vulnerabilities aren't limited to the southern border. In fact, if you look at the majority of terrorism-related arrests in the U.S., most have involved people who were radicalized within the country or who entered through legal means like airports. So should we be worried about the border? Sure, but let's not get tunnel vision. Here's a little-known fact for you. Since 9/11, the U.S. has invested billions of dollars in beefing up border security against potential terrorist threats. And I'm not just talking about fences and walls. We're talking about state-of-the-art surveillance technologies, biometric systems, and a level of cross-border cooperation with Mexico and Canada that's stronger than ever. In short, the border has never been more secure from a counterterrorism standpoint. Yet, the perception persists that terrorists are lurking in every shadow, waiting to pounce. Why is that? Well, part of it comes down to psychology, Fear is a powerful motivator, and it's a heck of a lot easier to sell security policies when the public is scared. Think about it. If you're a politician pushing for tougher border controls, what better way to rally support than to invoke the specter of terrorism? It's an emotional button that gets pressed time and time again, and it works because, let's face it, nobody wants to be the one who's soft on terror. But let's not ignore the reality here, folks. There are legitimate concerns about security at our borders. The challenge is separating the legitimate threats from the fear-driven narratives. And this is where things get tricky, because when it comes to national security, the stakes are incredibly high. On one hand, you want to ensure that your policies are tough enough to deter any would-be terrorists from even thinking about crossing the border. On the other hand, you don't want to go overboard and start infringing on civil liberties or creating unnecessary obstacles for legitimate travelers and migrants. So, where's the balance? How do we thread that needle? One way is through enhanced intelligence sharing and collaboration with our neighbors. Another is by investing in technologies that improve our ability to detect and prevent threats before they even reach the border. And of course, ongoing training and support for our Border Patrol and customs agents are crucial. These folks are the first line of defense, after all. They're out there every day, making tough calls and doing the best they can with the resources they have. And here's another thought. What if we focused more on addressing the root causes of terrorism rather than just playing defense all the time? Think about it. If you want to prevent weeds from growing in your garden, you don't just keep cutting them back. You pull them out by the roots. What if our national security strategy included more efforts to promote stability and peace in regions known for producing terrorist threats? What if we invested more in education, economic development, and diplomacy, rather than just building bigger walls? Now, I know some of you might be thinking, that sounds a bit too kumbaya for me, Bennett. And hey, I get it. The world can be a dangerous place, and sometimes you've got to be tough. But toughness doesn't mean being reckless. It means being smart, being strategic, and yes, sometimes being compassionate. Because here's the bottom line, folks. Security is not just about keeping people out. It's about building a world where people don't feel the need to resort to violence in the first place. So, is the terrorism threat at our borders real? Yes. Is it something we should be vigilant about? Absolutely. But should we let fear drive our policies and dictate our actions? I don't think so. Fear might be a good motivator, but it's a lousy advisor. We need to be guided by facts, by strategy, and most importantly, by our values. All right, folks, we've covered a lot of ground today, and we're not done yet. When we come back, we'll be taking a look into the future. What does the next chapter of border security look like? How will technology, policy, and international relations shape the landscape? And what role will you, the average citizen, play in all of this? Welcome back, everyone, to the final segment of today's deep dive into the complex world of U.S. border and national security. We've covered a lot so far, everything from the historical evolution of border policies to the human impact of immigration control, the relentless fight against drug trafficking, and the nuanced debate over terrorism threats. Now, it's time to shift our gaze forward. Let's look ahead to the future of border security and explore the technological innovations and policy directions that could shape the landscape in the years to come. All right, folks, let's be honest. When we think about the future of border security, our minds probably go straight to high-tech gadgets, right? Drones patrolling the skies, AI-powered surveillance systems, maybe even a few robotic guards that look like something out of a sci-fi movie. And guess what? We're not too far off. The future of border security is definitely going to be high-tech, but it's also going to be a lot more nuanced and sophisticated than just fancy gadgets. So, let's start with the tech. One of the biggest game changers on the horizon is artificial intelligence. That's right, folks. AI isn't just for your smart home assistant or your Netflix recommendations. It's also becoming a critical tool for national security. With AI, we're talking about predictive analytics that can help border agents identify potential threats before they even reach the border. We're talking about facial recognition software that can detect known criminals or suspects in real time. And let's not forget about biometric systems, fingerprint and retinal scanners that make it nearly impossible to use fake documents or stolen identities to cross the border. But as with all tech, there's a catch. For every step forward, there's a step back, or at least a sideways shuffle. The more we rely on technology, the more we have to consider issues like privacy, civil liberties, and the potential for misuse. I mean, do we really want Big Brother watching every move we make, scanning our faces, and tracking our movements? It's a slippery slope, and one that we need to navigate carefully. It's all about finding that balance between security and freedom, between innovation and regulation. And speaking of balance, let's talk about another key piece of the future puzzle: policy. Now, you might be thinking, oh great, more laws and regulations, just what we need. But hear me out. The future of border security isn't just about more rules, it's about smarter rules. It's about policies that are not just reactive, but proactive. Policies that address the root causes of migration and trafficking, rather than just the symptoms. Imagine a future where our border policy isn't just about building higher walls, but about building stronger partnerships, both with our neighbors and within our own communities. For instance, let's take the idea of a more integrated North American security approach. Think about it: a coalition between the US, Canada, and Mexico to tackle not just border security, but also the underlying issues like poverty, violence, and lack of opportunity that drive people to cross borders in the first place. This kind of approach could involve everything from joint border patrol operations to shared intelligence and coordinated law enforcement efforts. It's about creating a seamless web of security that doesn't just stop at the border, but extends across the continent. And here's another thought. What if we shifted some of our focus from enforcement to prevention? Instead of pouring billions into more border agents and surveillance tech, what if we invested more in programs that help stabilize communities in Mexico and Central America? What if we provided more aid to countries struggling with violence and economic instability, creating more opportunities for people to thrive at home rather than feel compelled to flee? It's a bold idea, and one that's certainly not without its challenges. But it's also an idea that's worth considering as we think about the long-term future of border security. Now, let's get back to technology for a moment, because I know some of you tech geeks out there are itching for more gadget talk. One of the coolest innovations on the horizon is the use of drones and autonomous vehicles for Border Patrol. Picture this: a fleet of drones patrolling the skies, equipped with thermal imaging cameras that can spot movement in even the darkest of nights, or autonomous vehicles that can navigate rough terrain without a human driver, making them perfect for surveillance in remote areas. These technologies not only enhance our ability to monitor the border, but they also reduce the risk to human agents who often have to operate in dangerous conditions. But, again, there's a flip side. As we increase our reliance on technology, we also increase our vulnerability to cyber threats. I mean, what good is a high-tech surveillance drone if a hacker halfway across the world can take control of it? Cybersecurity is going to be a major concern moving forward, and it's going to require a whole new set of skills, strategies, and resources to manage. We're not just building a physical wall anymore. We're building a digital one, too. So, where does all this leave us? Well, the future of border security is going to be a blend of old and new, of tech and tact, of strength and subtlety. It's going to require a holistic approach that incorporates not just the latest gadgets and gizmos, but also smart policies, international cooperation, and yes, a bit of good old-fashioned common sense. We're going to need leaders who are willing to think outside the box, who are willing to take risks, and who understand that security isn't just about keeping people out. It's about keeping our values in. And here's where you come in, folks. That's right. You didn't think you were just a passive listener, did you? The future of border security is going to require the participation and support of all of us. Whether it's staying informed, getting involved in local or national politics, or simply having conversations with your neighbors about these important issues, you have a role to play. Remember, democracy is a team sport, and we're all on the same team. So, what's the takeaway here? Simple. The future is unwritten. The choices we make today will shape the border of tomorrow. We can choose fear, or we can choose hope. We can choose division, or we can choose unity. We can choose to build walls, or we can choose to build bridges. The choice is ours, and I, for one, am optimistic that we'll choose wisely. All right, folks, that's all for today's episode of Full Spectrum Frontiers. We've covered a lot of ground, and hopefully, we've given you some food for thought, maybe even a little inspiration to take action. But before we wrap up, I've got a few final thoughts in the outro, so don't go anywhere just yet. All right, folks, we've reached the end of today's episode of Full Spectrum Frontiers. I want to thank you all for sticking with me through this deep dive into the complexities of U.S. border and national security. We've covered a lot today, from the historical evolution of our border policies to the human side of immigration, the relentless battle against drug trafficking, the nuanced reality of terrorism threats, and finally, a look into the future with technological innovations and policy shifts. It's been quite the journey, hasn't it? But here's the thing. This conversation doesn't stop here. These are big, complex issues that are going to continue evolving and impacting our lives in ways both big and small. And that means we all have a role to play in shaping the future. Whether that's through staying informed, getting involved in local or national discussions, or simply engaging with your community about these important topics. And hey, if you learned something new today or felt inspired by what you heard, do me a favor. Share this episode with a friend, a family member, or even that coworker who always seems to have an opinion on everything. Let's keep this conversation going and help spread the knowledge. And while you're at it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others find the show. And let's be honest, who wouldn't want to be part of the Full Spectrum Frontiers family? And remember, folks, no matter how complex or daunting these issues might seem, there's always hope. As long as we're willing to listen, learn, and work together, there's no challenge too big for us to tackle. So, keep asking questions, keep seeking the truth, and most importantly, keep looking at the bigger picture. Together, we can navigate these frontiers and build a brighter, more secure future for all. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Bennett Tanton, and this has been Full Spectrum Frontiers. Stay safe, stay informed, and until next time, keep pushing those boundaries. See you soon.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just you, me, and the odds. We stuck together, we two peas in a pod. You dealt a bad hand, I'm there seizing the cards. We'll never be separated till we see in the gods. We've been low together, high forever. Long as we go together, we'll die whenever. Be a light, couldn't let the darkness try you ever. Truth in my word, you I lie to never. And when the world gets a little too hard, wipe your eyes, put away your sorrow. When it's war, I'll be leading the charge, and I'll be still fighting for you tomorrow. Yeah, even with a blindfold or in different time zones, could find my way to you with my eyes closed. There's nothing between us. Go to Mars or Venus, stand in front of every one of them rocks, they slimming and being shit. Yeah.